I want to go back to what you said at the beginning of our interview, which was the five myths. Can we go back to that? What are they the five myths of? And can you get into it?
And I think we only got to 2, did we? Because I interrupted you.
Yeah, no problem. It's a lot, and our whole project is dedicated to exposing these and to, helping people understand them. But basically, the first one is about um, aquaculture saying that it's the solution to overfishing. So these are all myths that the industry is promoting. The second myth, which we kind of got into, is about aquaculture providing this seafood for this rising demand across the world. And we talked a little bit about this, but basically, aquaculture is sort of creating that demand through its misleading marketing, through pushing policymakers to allow it to grow infinitely. And in reality, people wouldn't be needing so much seafood. And it's really driving this demand in the global north, like in the US, where we're already eating so much. We have no need to eat anymore. The rest of the myths, we kind of did go through a lot of it. One is about it being a safe and healthy protein, which we talked about being not true. And then the fourth one is around climate. A lot of people change their diet because of climate change. And sometimes that ends up being, removing beef and replacing beef with seafood. So when you look at the numbers, though, farmed fish is actually worse than chicken and about the same as pork in terms of emissions. And farmed shrimp is way worse. It's the worst out of all sea animal foods. And lastly is regarding the labels, which I talked about a little bit, the certifications seeming to be this guarantee of sustainability and health, when in reality, they're often tied to industry. The industry pays them to be certified. So that kind of creates a conflict of interest. And there's really very little accountability for the certifications. Often they're not visiting every farm, so they don't even know, what's going on behind the scenes.
Hmm. So I noticed that you're working with Farm Forward. Is that a formal collaboration? How linked to them are you? I guess they don't really cover sea animals.
Yeah, so we're working with them a lot in terms of leveraging their expertise. They have extensive experience in humane washing, and looking at how different labels for the land animal farming industry have really tricked consumers into thinking that, they're buying eggs from happy hens and beef from, free roaming cows. And so they've had so much experience with this. They've, exposed, for example, antibiotics in antibiotic free meat at Whole Foods. It was supposed to be antibiotic free, and just showing people that, what they think they're paying for is not the reality. So in teaming up with Farm Forward, that really leverages their expertise, and we're working really closely with them to help get this new sort of industry. Well, it's not a new industry, but new to people, I think, thinking about it in this way, to get more exposure on this.
It's there are such differences in the land animal area because, Farm Forward states that it's anti-factory farming. And to be anti-factory farming in the land animal area basically means that you have to drastically reduce your consumption
Yeah.
or stop your consumption, because to treat animals well costs a lot of money, and it just doesn't work. So it's kind of inherent in being anti-factory farming to also be saying that you should reduce. But it seems like it's a little different with fish, because there's this alternative source of wild caught that people who really don't know a lot or don't care about the environment could just go back to. Do you find that like a contrast in how you in how you talk about the solution, that the solution has to include cutting down or hopefully cutting out? Was that question clear? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that gets tricky because I think that is kind of like a gut reaction that a lot of people have, is if farmed fish is so bad, why shouldn't I just go back to
Yeah.
eating wild fish? And
Where we
there
truly are
are
talking about just one bad day with wild caught fish.
In the bigger picture, though, I think when we look at just the massive scale, so farmed fish is making up a little more than half of what people eat now, and then wild caught has kind of gone to second place. But scale wise, first of all, we can't sustain this scale, these kinds of numbers, because neither one of those two industries can keep functioning at the level they are. So we have to reduce overall. In the US, most fish is farmed. So it's obvious that we have to reduce, and that includes farmed fish. But the reason we can't just go back to wild fish is because they're already at the brink. These fisheries are at the brink, and they keep getting worse every year. So we have to reduce pressure on them as well. And of course, with wild fish, a lot of the problems of, toxic chemicals like mercury, exposure to bacteria and antibiotics from passing through these farms or from wastewater. A lot of these problems still persist in wild fish, and then of course the welfare problems and the extremely inhumane conditions that they're subjected to in these nets, and then being thrown overboard and then slaughtered, and it's all just horrific. So we're really advocating for an overall reduction or, elimination if you can.
Yeah, no, I know you are. And those are really good arguments. But it is a little trickier than the land animal thing, where you kind of just don't have to eat. Like if people are eating a high welfare in animals, it's really expensive. If it's not really expensive, it's definitely not quote unquote high welfare. Anyway.
We obviously also are, giant proponents of not living a life that is centered around exploitation of animals in any capacity. What are your thoughts, either personally or as an advocate, about the word vegan?
Yeah, I mean, I personally use the word vegan, and I have no problems with it. I think that it's a great way to, identify living a life without consuming animal products. It depends on the audiences we're talking with, because, some of the decision makers that we're going to and presenting these ideas to might unfortunately not resonate with the word vegan. So we talk a lot about reduction, and eating more plant-based foods, and the decision makers we're talking with often are serving foods in large cafeterias, and so we want them to see plant-based foods are great. A lot of people are eating vegan. It's more inclusive for your menu. There's allergens you can avoid. It's more climate friendly. So we might not always use the word vegan when we're talking with certain people, but yeah, I use it for myself for sure.
I want to get into more of your work in both, individual messaging, but it looks like you're focusing a lot on institutional providers. But there was another issue I wanted to get into first, and I just think this is a really interesting issue. And I'm wondering, since you are dealing with both salmon and shrimp, are your main focus, I think, for the moment, because there's a lot of sea animals out there. Like, do you differentiate, like when you're talking about welfare, do you differentiate between fish and shrimp, or I guess it could even come to clams or oysters, animals whose sentience is really not clear to people? It's really not necessarily clear to even scientists. When you keep reaching to a further level. Do you talk about levels of sentience or sophistication of sentience, or is it just like since you're only dealing with shrimp, but imagine you're dealing with others as well? Is it just like they're sentient or they're not, and you feel you can convince people of that, or do you just avoid the issue completely? I'm always so curious. Now that we've discovered that everybody out there is sentient, I think our messaging on the issue has become so much more complex. I'm just wondering how you handle it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We don't talk a lot about it with decision makers who are, concerned about their menus and all of that. But for me personally, in my work, I've always had a huge affinity for crustaceans and been keenly aware of their ability to suffer. Several years back, I guess it's been about 10 years or so now, but I founded a project to help hermit crabs who were being, or still are being, caught from the Caribbean and sold on the beach here in the US at shops during the summer. And it's a really cruel industry because they're taking these animals who can live for 30 years out in the wild and putting them into tiny cages where tourists will take them home, and then they basically die of suffocation over the course of a few months because the air isn't humid enough and they require very specific conditions. So for me, crustacean welfare has always been a huge concern of mine. I have a particular love for crustaceans, and I think, you know, science has shown us like they can rub wounds when they're hurt. They can form bonds, they can work together. So I think, you know, the sentience is pretty clear, and we need to be able to recognize that for all sea animals.